Hello and welcome to Anatomy with Dr. P. In this video, we're going to be looking at blood flow through the abdomen and pelvis. Now, here we can see our diaphragm separating our thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So as our aorta up here, it's off screen, but as our aorta merges out of the heart, we call it the ascending aorta. We have our aortic arch, and then it becomes the descending aorta. The thoracic portion of the descending aorta runs behind the heart, and as it moves down through the diaphragm, we refer to it as the abdominal aorta. Now, the abdominal aorta gives off several different branches. The first branch that comes off immediately after it passes through the diaphragm is known as the celiac trunk or celiac artery. And our celiac artery has three major branches. The first is this one here, which is referred to as the left gastric artery. That's going to supply the stomach and esophagus. Our second is this one. This is called the splenic artery. Now, the splenic artery keys you into where it's going. It's going over here to the spleen, which is in the left upper quadrant of our abdomen. Our third branch off of our celiac trunk is called the common hepatic artery. Now, let's talk about that name for a minute. Common hepatic. Hepatic means liver. So we know that this artery is heading over to our right upper quadrant to go to the liver. But common means that that artery is a shared passageway. In other words, it's going to give off several different branches to lots of organs on its way to the liver. We can see here our right gastric artery. That's also going to supply our stomach. We have a gastroduodenal artery that comes off and goes to the stomach as well as parts of the small intestine. And then as our common hepatic artery travels over, eventually it's going to give off the hepatic artery proper. Now, hepatic artery proper, hepatic, as we said earlier, means liver. Proper means that artery actually goes to the organ it says it's going to. In this case, it's going into our liver. Now, as we come down, our next artery that emerges off of our abdominal aorta is this one here. This is referred to as the superior mesenteric. And I know you're having a hard time seeing it because on this model it just looks like a little nub. Superior means above. The mesenteries are the connective tissue membranes that help hold the small intestine to the posterior body wall. So this artery runs through those mesenteries. In other words, it's supplying the small intestine with blood. Now, to help you visualize this, I'm going to grab a slightly different model, this one here. So here we're looking at these small intestines, and if I look at the back of the small intestines, I can see this very large artery that's outlined in yellow that's supplying all of our small intestines as well as major portions of the large intestine. That very large artery is the superior mesenteric. So even though it looks like a tiny little nub on this, it's actually a very big artery. As we continue down, our next branch off of our abdominal aorta is this branch here and this branch here. We can see these two branches are heading out to these organs, which are kind of shaped like kidney beans. Those are called the renal arteries. Remember, renal means kidney. As I continue down my abdominal aorta, the next arteries I meet are these very long arteries. These are referred to as the gonadal arteries. And that's because they're going to supply the gonads with blood, either the testes or ovaries. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth does the testicular or ovarian artery come off all the way up here close to my kidney? And the reason for that is when we were a fetus, the testes and ovaries actually develop up here close to the kidney and then migrate down the posterior body wall. And as they move down the posterior body wall, that artery grows along with them. Continuing down our abdominal aorta, the next artery that we hit is this one here. This is our inferior mesenteric. Inferior means below. Mesentery again refers to that connective tissue membrane that's anchoring our small intestine and large intestine onto the posterior body wall. So if I go back to this model, I can see this lower artery here that's supplying my descending colon and sigmoid colon with blood, this artery is the inferior mesenteric. It's still a very large artery, but nowhere near as big as my superior mesenteric. Now, after the inferior mesenteric artery, our abdominal aorta comes down and bifurcates. That's just a fancy way to say that it splits into two. Now, if we look at where this split is occurring, we can see here's our hip bones on either side, and we recall from an earlier lab that the top of the hip is referred to as the ilium. So this vessel here is called the common iliac artery. Common means it's a shared passageway, and iliac refers to the fact that it's right at the same level as the ilium. Our common iliac artery is going to split into two arteries, the internal iliac artery, which is going to run into the pelvis and supply things like the bladder and internal genitalia, and our external iliac artery, which is going to continue down into the lower limb.